Friends, welcome back to another episode of Faith Unraveled. Today we have another episode in our deconstruction series. Today we're going to be talking about bridge building between members of the church and people who have deconstructed and left the faith. Isn't it interesting that for the church, it seems like it's very easy to build bridges with people who've never been Mormons?
Yeah.
Like, it's great with like the Jewish community and the Muslim community and the Catholic community, but like people who've left the church, I feel like it is the most stigmatized of all the groups that aren't members of the church. It is those who have left the church where it's like really impossible. And maybe because they view us as a lost cause and everyone else is like a missionary opportunity. I don't know. But I think we could go ahead and dive into some of our thoughts today. And I just want to say that nothing that we discuss here is conclusive. This is all kind of a revolving door of ideas. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about may be disputable, and it may be something that you've tried and it didn't work. Please tell us in the comments what your thoughts are about all of these things, because I think each one of these points that we're going to mention today could be disputed on either end. So we invite you to participate in this conversation if you're an active member of the church. We know that there are a lot of active members that are watching this series and have a lot to say. So I just want to open the door and say this is an opportunity. We welcome feedback. Could be critical, could be whatever floats your boat. Go ahead and put it in the comments.
Yeah, I think that's the key because we don't know everything ourselves. We're just going based upon our experience, right?
And we haven't found the answers.
No, because I'll call myself out. I don't think I've done a good job of bridge building with my Mormon friends, and I haven't done a good job of bridge building with my family.
So maybe this discussion will be a good door to open to that. Okay, so the first point that we have is open communication. And one thing that I wanted to mention with this is the most universal experience with those who leave the church is that no one asks you why.
Yeah, it makes no sense to me. And it's very hurtful at the very beginning point of your deconstruction, because as you start finding things out that do not align with what you know, you want to talk to people about it. And as you begin to talk to people about it, you find out that most of them don't want to hear it at all. And that becomes very, you feel very isolated and alone because you can't talk to anybody about it. And it just gets worse as you continue to move down and you step fully away from the church. You still, like all your friends in the church that you thought were really close to you, they won't ask, why did you leave the church? I think I had three people that I felt like were close to me. They asked why. Beyond that, no one else did.
I have a very embarrassing story to share. I feel like it's relevant to this conversation. We had some friends that stepped away from the church, and one of our kids was going to their house for music lessons. And I knew that they stepped away from the church. I knew it was because of information that they had found. And I wanted to let them know that I still loved them, that this was not going to change our relationship. But when I did this, I was picking up my kid from his lesson. I said, "Hey, I heard you guys are not coming back to church. I just wanted to let you know that it doesn't change anything for me." And he immediately responded, "Oh yeah, well, see, we found some things." I think it was Mormon think that they found. Their deconstruction was very similar to mine. Like they found all this stuff, they started going through it and went, "Oh my God." So anyway, he says this to me, and you know what I did? I literally went like this. "Oh, I'm okay. I don't need to know. I don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter." I basically walked away from the conversation with my hands over my ears. And looking back at that experience, at that time, I was so in. I was posting on my blog, The Standard Works in a Year scripture schedule. I talked about it on social media, like pro LDS blogger. And I remember just thinking in that moment, like, it was like viewing it like a virus. Like, whatever you have found, I don't want to know. And it's because I viewed it as a virus. And so it's so interesting that then, like 10 years later, Elder Renland, is it Elder
I think
Renland?
it was Renlin.
Or who's the other one?
Razvan?
Razband. I think it was Razband. One of them went on social
Renlin,
media
I think it was.
and said, we're so grateful that, it's COVID that we caught and not the virulent virus of a faith crisis, basically. And I was so offended by that because I had had a faith crisis at the time. And I was like, what a horrible thing to say. And then looking back, I'm like, God, that's exactly how I viewed it. That
Yeah.
is exactly how I viewed the faith crisis, was like a virus. So I remember what that was like. So in order for there to be open communication, what has to exist?
I think you have to be patient with one another in the conversation. And when I say patient, there's going to be certain things that are said between a Mormon and an ex-Mormon that will trigger.
Because if someone asks why, are you really going to throw at them all the reasons why? What would be something you could say?
When they did ask why, for me, one of my friends decided to go hiking with us. We were taking a pause before we hit the peak, and we were drinking water, and I shared with him that my testimony was being challenged significantly, and that I no longer believed, and I went into bits and pieces of the why. I didn't go into like way detail. I went into just some of the very basics, and he sat there and held space for me and listened to me during that period of time. And I felt very validated that he would continue to do that. My other friend, it was driving back from a Padres baseball game, and we sat in the car, and he allowed me to go in as detail as I wanted. And I went really, I wouldn't say I went into everything, but I went into some specific details, and he held space for me in that conversation too. So I think, you have, in these open conversations, you have to allow the Mormon or the member be able to communicate without you being triggered. So I think both sides have to allow, if I'm going to talk about the things that ended up impacting me and my faith crisis, then they're going to be allowed to talk about the stuff the church has done for them, right? So that's where you were talking, I think, of open communication.
Yeah. And I was saying, like, you want to hear their testimony as much as they want to hear what you found. Because both are looking at each other like, this is shit. So I would say that these conversations do not need to happen repetitively.
Yeah.
I would say maybe having like one good conversation about it, and then maybe other things will come up. We can see each other, love each other. We can talk, we can have mutual respect. And I know that open communication, as far as what they believe, which I no longer believe, it's not going to be helpful to mention it when I see them.
So my mom said, hey, we won't talk about religion and politics, right? That's what she came to me and said, because we had a conversation, and she wanted to know why, and I shared her to some certain extent the why behind leaving. And then after, she's like, well, Grandma, which was a Methodist, she's like, we never really talked about Mormonism or what she believed, and we were just fine. And so why don't we just do the same? We won't talk about religion and politics. But you do still, as a ex-Mormon, feel like you're on a different plane because of the doctrine. Like we feel, or I should say I feel, I shouldn't say we feel. I'm sure there's others that feel like this, that as they believe in an eternal family, that we're now outside of that. And so that's still painful to feel at the time. And I don't know how to solve that. That will always be there. When you first deconstruct, there's a lot of anger that goes in with it. And so during that period of time, conversations can be very tense and triggering. And you probably don't at times know why you're feeling certain feelings because of the deconstruction going on. At one point in time, the church controlled everything in our lives. It was our identity. It was who we were. As we pull that away, we lose that, and you lose the identity. And then you also have a lot of anger for being deceived. And so over time, there's a lot of healing that goes on. And as you're 3-4 years out, like some of the stuff that really triggered you at the very beginning won't trigger you as you move along with time. And I think it gets better and better over time.
And part of that is being able to have safe spaces that you can talk about it.
Yeah.
Just being able to talk about it is kind of like an unloading process. So stuff isn't as triggering. I feel like when it stays in the dark, that's when it's absolutely the worst.
Yeah. Well, and it comes out in weird times too.
Totally.
Weird places. And so what members have to understand is the reason why we talk about it, it's a healing modality for us. We feel very triggered. We feel very deceived. And we're now talking about the negative and the harmful actions of the church. It's not directed toward them at all. It is fully about the church. But because the church is part of their identity, they take it personal in there. But over time, as an ex-Mormon gets through, we can come to a common ground. At the very beginning, it's very hard. So I'm just letting people know, if you're hitting someone and then right off dropping into the rabbit hole, learning all this stuff, asking the why is really good during this period of time. If you're a friend and you want to know about your ex-Mormon friend that's going through it, ask the why, but be very cautious on like bearing your testimony, because what they have gotten through is they have now believed that what the church has taught is now no longer true.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's something that might be useful for members of the church who have a family member who stepped away. I know they seem really different to you, but not very long ago, they felt the same way about the church as you do now. So bearing your testimony, I know it feels like the right thing to do, but for someone who's left the church, it's probably just going to make them not want to spend time with you. And I don't mean you can't bear your testimony like just today I was communicating with a family member who said, "I'll take all the prayers I can get. I really believe in prayer." And I just think that's beautiful. That's a tenet of her belief system in prayer, and I think that's fine. I'm not going to say like, "Oh, that's offensive to me," but what I'm talking about is like some of the text messages that we were getting kind of in the beginning of like really long testimonies of the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants and the Restored Gospel and Joseph Smith. And like, I don't think that that's going to go as far as you think it is. Just like for the person who's left the church, expressing to the person, "I think you're in a cult and I think you're blinded and I was blinded and we were all blinded and the church is doing all these horrible things and they're hiding sexual abuse." And, to you, that's true. And to me, that's true too. But it's not useful. So I think it's difficult. This is why it's difficult, right? It's like there's not really an easy prescription for this. I think that the important thing is that we're just sitting here like talking about it,
Yeah.
But I think what I wanted to close on that you said is that time heals. And so just know that if your family member has left the church and they are hella annoying to be around because they're talking about all this stuff, it's not going to be that way forever. And fortunately, there are ex-Mormon spaces that they can come and visit and they can talk in our comments and they can be in groups. And there are places that they're going to be able to process this stuff. There are life coaches and counselors and therapists that are also open to allowing people to come in and process this stuff and trauma, and so this is great. It's good for all of us that these spaces exist. It's good for the Mormons and it's good for the ex-Mormons.
And that time might allow it, integration back in too, meaning that over time they won't be so angry and over time they won't be so triggered, that they might be able to stand in that place without being triggered. But up front, they might set a boundary up front where they can't deal with it because of their own mental health.
Yeah.
And that's where members have to respect that.
Yeah. I think there has to be respect on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough. So if you are an ex-Mormon, I will flip this scenario. I mean, and this is obvious to everyone, but I think if you have left the church, your loved ones, just know that bearing their testimony to you is an act of service and an act of love. and that's why they're doing it.
Well, and they've been taught by the church to do
And they've
that.
been taught to do it. And
they don't know any different, and they don't understand how much triggering that is and how harmful that is for that ex-Mormon that's right there, that understands that everything just became bullshit to them.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully members can listen to this and understand this, because that is the wrong way to approach.
If you could go back in time, do you think you would change the way that those testimonies were delivered to you? So when testimonies were delivered to us when we were going through our faith deconstruction, the response was, well, actually.
Yeah, I came back with
right?
the facts and said, hey, you are bearing your testimony about
Joseph Smith. Let me tell you about Joseph Smith.
Let me tell you. Or the Book of Mormon.
Right.
Let me tell you about the Book of Mormon.
Right.
And
so what I would say now from my perspective, and I'm interested to hear if you have the same viewpoint, is that I would like to have just said, I know that that is very meaningful to you. I know that bearing your testimony is an act of love. And so I thank you for that. And I know this means a lot to you. And so thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah, the only thing that I think, if you handle it that way,
they might keep doing it. And then at that point, you have to draw a boundary.
Yeah, then you have to draw the boundary and say, hey, I can't.
Which I've done. Yeah. So there was a family member that I love more than life itself that kept mentioning certain scriptures. And so I finally, and they were mostly from DNC, which was interesting. So I just said, Doctrine and Covenants to me is a playbook written by a cult leader in order to create his agenda and say that Jesus Christ gave it to him. And so when you mention things from that book, it's very triggering to me. So I would like to ask you that when we talk, that we don't talk about Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah.
And we've talked about his sacred beliefs since then, and it's totally fine. I mean, so that was what I discovered my boundary is. You sometimes don't know what your boundaries are until you get faced with it, because I didn't think that talking about scripture would be so triggering to me, but it's the fact that it was Doctrine and Covenants, and that was such a big part of my deconstruction, because that's where the doctrine of the eternal family and celestial marriage, which is also known as polygamy, and Jesus Christ's threat to destroy Emma. There were so many things in there that were so triggering to me. And so I'm like, you're taking this gold nugget out of Doctrine and Covenants that sounds really good in isolation, kind of like the happiness letter, right? It sounds good in happiness is the object and design of our existence. Okay. Well, did you know that letter was written in order to coerce a young girl, right? And threaten her, right? And to say, oh, sometimes things that look really bad are good in the eyes of the Lord. So he's just trying to justify his bad behavior. But if you isolate that plan of happiness, oh yeah, sounds great. That's why so many people use it in their talks. So I just discovered that was a boundary for me, and I asked for them not to. I think it's probably come up since then, and I'm willing to give it a little grace because that relationship is really important to me.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to have a different tolerance level. Everybody is. But I have created that boundary, and now it's up to me whether or not I want to enforce the boundary.
Yeah. So here's the other, I was going to give one other example before we move on. Was I remember a year into our faith crisis, we had one of Gavin's primary teachers, guess we left when he was 10, so it would have been 11, come over with a picture of the temple and said, hey, I wanted to bring this over to Gavin. I'm like, we don't need a picture of the temple in our house. And I gave it back to this person, and thinking about it, that person was just trying to show love, but I felt like I needed to set a boundary to not have people come over and bring, we call it love bomb, right? Love bomb us when we're going through that in the middle of that faith crisis, because all it does is it just continues to trigger. And so I had to set a boundary there with them and say, hey, I really don't want this, and I don't think my son wants this also.
And it's interesting because from the perspective of that member of the church, they probably thought that was a hostile interaction. It's oh, they just don't want any interactions. So I guess this is a good thing to realize that those are normal responses from someone who's left the church.
Yeah.
If they've left the church because of something that they found, bringing over an invitation to the primary program or whatever, it's going to feel a little,
Yeah.
you've got to know that that's going to feel triggering, and it's going to feel like strategy to get us back. And just know that that doesn't have to be the end of the relationship, but these are the terms that that person is setting. We don't want a picture of a temple dropped off.
And I would like to say is they're in a system. They're in a system that teaches a certain way, and they're just following what's part of that system. And that system has taught them multiple times, less active members go out and reach out to the less active members. We're a less active member. So they were coming out and reaching out to us. So getting upset and angry at them for them just abiding within the system, I'm not sure that's the most helpful way to bridge build also.
So would you do something differently than you did at that time?
That person in it is PMO and physically in, mentally out.
So he gets it.
So he gets it. And I had to explain that a little bit more, the reason why behind that. And he understood. He sees it as like, hey, why don't you just continue to go, even though you don't believe?
It's community.
Yeah, it's community.
He's like, I don't even believe in God. I'm just here for the community.
Exactly.
I love it.
but I wanted to make sure that like other people didn't continue to bring stuff over.
Okay, next one we're going to talk about common ground, finding common ground. I left the church 4 years ago, but I am still super passionate about family history. Thank Zeus. Because now I can talk to people in the church that I have relationships with about family history, and I'm not making it up. I really am super interested in family history. Now, granted, I am interested also now in filling in the blanks for all the people who weren't members of the church who have hardly anything written in their memories. But the church has great resources for family history. And while they do, of course, have a motive for this, which is, of course, temple work, for me, those resources can be helpful. So that's a good way that I can bridge the gap there. Politics can be tough because a lot of times, I'm just thinking of some other areas you could have common ground. Politics, I have a sibling that is still an active member, but our politics are actually not that different. And so I talk to him a lot about that. I call him and ask him his opinion on all kinds of things. And that's been a fun way to connect. We're also both interested in like exercise and health and nutrition. So we still have a lot of common ground, and we talk all the time. And our conversations are like 1 to 2 hours long. So fortunately, with him, I'm able to really continue to have a very close relationship because we have common things to reflect on and to talk about. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think that's important. You have to figure out something that you can talk about. And what becomes harder as you are through the deconstruction or in the middle of the deconstruction is the like-minded. It's hard to be like-minded with someone that's in the church because of how much you're going through a change in what you're thinking. And so being able to find those common grounds to where you can talk to someone, I think is very, very important. Like when my friend took me to the Padre game, we didn't talk about religion the whole entire time. We talked about like business, what's going on in San Diego, his kids, my kids. And so we figured out different ways of communicating. Eventually we sat down in the car and talked about that, but we went 3-4 hours spending time with each other at a Padre game, talking about things that had nothing to do with the church.
Interesting. Yeah. It's obviously going to be more of a struggle with certain people to continue these relationships, especially if all you had to talk about before was church stuff. It's going to be hard. And honestly, I'm fine with people talking about their church stuff if they're talking about their calling or their kids' mission that they're getting ready to go on or something like that. Like we have carpool with some kids that are still members, and like they'll talk to me about what's happening in Scouts or brother so-and-so. And yeah, like I think flexibility goes a long way. We don't have to be so boundaried up all the time with everyone, you know, and you don't have to cut ties with everyone. This is all going to have to do with your personal bandwidth, and there's no right or wrong. You may have a very tender zone, and you're like, I can't be around this at all right now. And for me, I'd rather be able to cultivate, you know, those few relationships that are left. And I think tolerance and flexibility is important at that time. Now, if they started to like come in and say, "Oh, we just dropped by to take Gavin to Young Men's with us," like that would
That's
be
the
an
boundary.
area where we'd have to set a boundary. But for right now, flexibility has been um
Yeah, and
good.
we know some ex-Mormons. It's like I don't necessarily want to have Mormon friends, and I think that's just fine. Like if that's where they've come to because
That's
of
fine.
the harm, that's fine also. This is the bridge building that we're also talking here is there's a lot of times there's members who have wives who are still in the church or husbands still in the church or kids still in the church, and so bridge building is very important to keep those family relationships. And so having some type of uh, tool to help them with the communication and not trigger each other, I think is very important. Not everybody fits the same mold, and there's a number of people who want to keep their friends, their Mormon friends, or their Mormon family members like close, and so that's just fine also.
I think the other thing that has been helpful for me as well, more particularly on social media, is that people who are still believers, some of them are going to deconstruct at some point.
Yeah.
And if you've created an environment where nobody feels safe talking to you because they're afraid you're going to blow up at them or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I mean, this is not the case for most ex-Mormons, but let's just say, for instance, then when that person starts to deconstruct, are they going to have you to come and talk to?
Hopefully.
So we talked about last week sharing this information with people who are active believers unsolicited is not necessarily going to be helpful, but they will at some point come across it. And at that point, they might feel safe because think about it. When I deconstructed, my immediate thing was, I need to talk to this person and this person and this person. I want to know if this is what they found. And sure enough, it was.
Yeah. Well, the only thing I was going to say on this is where I think people have to give each other grace. Like, if you're going to go out there and post your homecoming or your kids going on a mission
Or their testimony on their mission.
testimony on their mission, ex-Mormons can then post what they found around the church.
Absolutely.
I mean, that you have to keep a safe place for both. Like,
Yeah.
you cannot say, hey, I'm going to preach the gospel over here and not allow the bridge building to happen where an ex-Mormon can share what they feel is harmful
Yeah.
to them. And I often see Mormons not being able to hold space for that. And like I've had them come in and say, hey, you're anti-Mormon, and some very derogatory things
On your post.
on my post. That post wasn't for them, by the way. That post was for all the ones that are out there that are feeling alone and not quite sure.
You're waving your flag.
I'm waving, exactly. I'm waving my flag that, hey, I'm a safe place if you want to come and talk to me. And guess what? A lot of the members don't know this. I've had a number of people who are still in the church that have reached out and said, hey, I'm feeling the same way. I'm so happy that you shared this stuff. I really feel seen and heard. And so I continue to do that because
And they
of
might
that.
continue being physically and mentally out for the next 10 years, but at least they know that you're a safe place now that they can come and talk to you. To me, social media is fair game. You're going to have people in both camps. You're going to have Mormons who do not want to follow ex-Mormon content creators, and you're going to have ex-Mormons who do not want to follow the my son is on a mission and this is their testimony. Personally, I have nieces and nephews on missions and I'm fine with seeing their testimonies. I remember being their age. I remember having the same feelings that they do about the church, and it's fine for me. But that's not to say that that would have worked like 4 years ago when I first deconstructed. So it's going to evolve and change as well.
And it's okay if they unfollow you. Like,
oh yeah, that's a good
say,
point.
and the sibling situation I had where they unfollowed me, the reason why I was upset at that wasn't because they unfollowed me. And I've shared that to people. If you don't like what I'm posting, feel free to unfollow. It's totally fine. I don't mind that. What I do mind is someone influencing someone else to follow me. because of that, it just feels like, I don't know. It feels like I'm being attacked in that situation. Whether or not that might be I'm overreacting and being sensitive.
There's a lot of tender feelings, and the word triggered in this sense is like the literal psychological term of triggering, which is that something has happened to you and that thing triggered that past memory, that past trauma, that past hard feeling. So now that's what's coming up in your body.
Yeah,
and that's real. That's a real thing. And it's going to vary for different people. We were the prescribed archetype, you and I, cisgender, white, male, female. I was not quite the full desired archetype because I'm female, but like we didn't experience the harm like someone who was
LGBT
or didn't identify with their gender assigned at birth, or a person of color. You know what I mean? So their experience deconstructing is going to be
Very
quite different. Yeah. And that might mean that there's more chance for being triggered, that there's more chance of getting dysregulated because of something that's said, because there's more harm there. So that's why this isn't like a one size fits all.
But I think it is great to find a common ground and be able to communicate on a common ground if you want to keep those relationships. That's the way that you're going to be able to do that. And by staying away from those triggers, or understanding if you do hit a trigger that you need to be patient in that situation, the way that the other one responds. Am I perfect at this myself? No, I have made multiple mistakes during my deconstruction during this. And so hopefully this helps for other people.
Absolutely. It's interesting that as you deconstruct your religious system, you will probably start to identify toxic traits in individuals that you have loved and cared about, people who have played a big part in your life. And this is the other thing as well. You can prioritize now relationships, and you might identify that some of these toxic traits that exist in the church also existed in your family dynamic. I know for a lot of people that were raised in the church, some of the almost narcissistic traits of the church also exist like in their parents. They may start to deconstruct, wow, this person has these manipulative behaviors, these toxic behaviors, and you may want to set boundaries based on that as well.
Yeah, I do think it's very important to know that when you do set a boundary, that boundary is for you, and not trying to set the boundary on someone else.
That is such a good point. Yeah. I didn't understand that about boundaries until I deconstructed that when you create a boundary, you're the one that has to respond to that. So you've created a condition that you're not willing to participate in. And so it's not to say you will never speak about this in front of me. It's that if that does happen, then you have to decide what to do next.
It's up to you. Like, I'm the one that has to respond to it. If they break that boundary, and they can do that. That's up to them. That's their individual. If they don't want to follow that boundary, that's totally fine. Then I have to then make the decision on my end. What do I want to do? They've now broken the boundary. Do I step away? Do I like what do I do in that situation? So each person's going to have to figure that out, whether you're a Mormon or Exmormon, because both of them are going to set boundaries, right?
Absolutely. And that, let's not pretend that there isn't toxicity in the Exmormon spaces too. I mean, there's toxicity anywhere that you go. When you set a boundary with someone, you're just letting them know what you're willing to tolerate or not tolerate. But here's the other thing. You don't necessarily have to tell the person your boundary.
Unspoken boundary. Right?
Yeah, an unspoken boundary. And you can approach your boundary with flexibility. It's not always a no contact. We think of boundaries as like going no contact. That's kind of the most significant. But you can also have boundaries where you're like, I'm willing to do this kind of activity and this kind of activity with this person. And so maybe you set up a beach day. Maybe you set up a pool day. But you're not going to go to a primary activity with your kids with that person. Yeah. You're not going to do something else. So that's a boundary that you've set, and you're in control of that, and you can change it. You can modify it. You can enforce it. Like, however, I think that's important.
The only other thing I'd say is you have to also, like, if you set boundaries on everything,
you might be losing out on some relationships.
You might lose out on the relationship. You might isolate yourself. So you have to, like, everything there's balance in life, right?
And maybe it's important to you, maybe it's not. You really
Yeah.
do have to look at how important is this relationship to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the other thing that I think is helpful is using neutral terms. So there are certain terms when you're having communication with someone that can be really hella triggering. Like if you say to a member of the church that they're in a cult, that may very well be the case to you, but to them, that's going to feel very hurtful. What are some triggering words that members of the church use? Apostasy?
Yeah, apostate,
Uh,
anti-Mormon.
Anti-Mormon,
Like
yeah.
we hear that a lot. Like my Facebook posts that I have, have it multiple times. Where
We wouldn't
he's
mind
now
if you were leaving. We just mind that you're anti-Mormon
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Well, to us, anti-Mormon materials are just church history.
Mhm.
So that's a good one. What are some other terms that are not neutral?
Like-
Even the term truth.
And I don't know how you solve that. Like we see Joseph Smith as a predator. At least I should say I see Joseph Smith as a predator. He manipulated and coerced young women to have sex.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say young women, I'm talking from 14 on up, and we don't probably know like how pervasive this was.
Are you telling me that he didn't practice polygamy because of all the husbands that died at war?
That's what we were taught. That's what we were taught.
They were actually little girls living in his home as foster kids?
Yeah.
Essentially.
So the point
Not officially. Did foster care exist back then? I don't even know.
Yeah, I don't know. Too.
But they were living there as in like mom died. And then he's like, Dad, you're going on a mission. I'm going to take these 3 older ones. And by the way, the Lord has commanded me to marry you, to be sealed to you. Do you want the gates of heaven to be closed to you and your family? Because that is what will happen if
and I have an angel coming to kill me if I don't do this.
Oh, that's right. And me, the prophet of the Lord, is going to die if you don't say yes. Yeah. So it's just so much different than it's presented with you. But yeah, that's another term. Joseph Smith was a predator. That's probably not a neutral term, even though it's true to you.
It's true to me. And someone say Joseph Smith is a prophet. That's another one. Like on the opposite side, if you tell me Joseph Smith is a prophet, that's very triggering to me. I don't see that at all.
Yeah.
So.
These are all a lot of tough rules to play by. I don't think we can expect anyone to.
I don't know but you have to think when you're talking to a member of the church, or if you're talking to the ex-Mormon there, you have to really watch what you say.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to add is that criticism of the church does not equal a personal criticism. But I think that this is another tough one because when you are a member of the church, your whole identity is defined by the church's narrative. And so it's really hard to say that talking about the church isn't the same as talking about you, but that's how it feels.
Yeah. Well, and ex-Mormons, the way we see it is we love, like the people are good. The people inside the church are mostly good people. And they try to do
sometimes compelled to do really shitty things because of their indoctrination
based upon the system that they're in. But when we're criticizing the church, when we have this podcast here, we're not criticizing the people. That is not our point here. What we're criticizing is the system itself and the harm the system does to certain people and the harm it did to us. Like we didn't know in the church, we didn't know that we were being harmed. And so I would assume most members in the church don't understand the harm that they're going through. As you deconstruct and the truth claims go away, then that's when you start realizing what the harm was and how it impacted you. And so when we go out and vocally talk about it, we're not trying to vocally talk about the LDS people. We're talking about the system and how the system harmed us.
Yeah. Someone totally threw me for a loop when they said it was a pro LDS creator. And he said, when people post content that is anti-Mormons or something like that, and he defined it as like anti-Mormon meant like it was anti-Semitic. Like what?
Yeah.
No, anti-Mormon is against the doctrine. Yeah. It's not against the people.
Yeah.
When you were if you were raised in like a toxic family system with a narcissist at the head of it, and they have a lot of people that dislike them, they may tell you that people dislike your family because you're a family of redheads. That's why they hate us. And as a child, you don't realize that the reason that they actually don't like your parent is because he has lied to them. He has misused their money. He has stolen from them. He has told stories that aren't true. He's harmed people. But he's not going to tell you that as the kid. What's he going to tell you? Oh, people don't like us because we're a family of redheads. So you're going to go about your whole life and you're like, people are persecuting us because we have red hair. And anyone would agree with you that that's really dumb. But that's not actually what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
What's actually going on is that the head of your system is being criticized because they're doing a shitstorm of harm to a whole lot of people. And so people are mad about it. And they want to talk about it. But what's he telling you? No, he's not telling you people dislike me because I've been dishonest. People dislike me because I lied about our organization's history. People dislike us because I'm misusing their funds, their tithing dollars, because I'm not giving it to charitable organizations. I'm building malls and amassing what will become trillions of dollars. No, he's not going to tell you that. He's going to tell you they don't like us because we're a family of redheads. Can you believe it? That's what the church is doing to its members.
Yeah. Yeah.
That wasn't that wasn't the direction I was intending to take for this episode.
Well, no, but I think it's I do think it's a good point. If members understand how we feel and how you just explained it, they will understand that it's not toward them, it's toward the church.
Exactly.
Whether or not they believe it or not, they most likely do not believe what you're saying, and that's okay. That's totally okay.
But they need to know it's not them that we're attacking.
Exactly.
It is their system. And
I would say a majority believe that we're personally attacking them. I would say it's in the minority that believe that it's not them.
And maybe it's the people that have partly deconstructed that understand what we're talking about. Yeah. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to talk about today is the idea of just giving each other grace. In the very beginnings of your deconstruction, you're going to say things that you're going to regret, and your family members might say things that they regret. And I am a believer in second chances. I think that it's important, if these are relationships that you are going to mourn losing, then giving grace is important. If the relationships that have been harming you since the day you were born, what is the term? C'est la vie.
Yeah.
Do what you need to do. But if it's a relationship that you love, that you care about, I think that there is a lot to be said for time, healing,
patience,
grace, forgiveness can go a long way. I've said things that I didn't want to say, that I shouldn't have said. I would do them differently now if I could go back.
Oh, I would too. Like in my anger phase, I blew up a number of people. And
well, you didn't start a TikTok channel.
That's true. You did.
No, but I think bearing your grievances is an important part of the healing process. That's why we do it on social media. You don't have to do it to people directly.
That's why we're doing it. Just TikTok. I mean, this YouTube
podcast.
Right?
Yeah.
Is to kind of heal from that. But part of that is you're spot on. Is like, as much as we want grace for members,
we need to give it too.
We need to give it back.
Yeah.
And if you decide not to give it back, then understand that you might be isolating and hurting friendships.
There was a girl who's 22. She's raising money to try to get out of her house. She posted video of her dad just being like horrific, just very verbally abusive, very, very verbally abusive. So people in her position are like, hey guys, I don't need to give grace. I don't want to give grace. And I 100 million times over support that decision to cut off a toxic relationship. If there is a relationship that is hurting you, by all means. I think in our situation, I'll just speak for myself. For my personal situation with my family, those are very important relationships that I want to maintain. They're people that I love deeply. I want to have bridge building. And that may mean that at family dinner, there might be some sort of spiritual insight that they had that they want to share with me. And at this point in my faith journey, I'm totally fine with that. Those are relationships that I'm willing to take a little bit of discomfort to be able to continue the relationship. Yeah. But for those who are in toxic relationships that need to end, I'm in support of that as well.
Yeah. For me, this one's interesting. I was thinking through it as you were talking about it. For me, I do want to give grace. I want to give patience. but where if I feel like I'm not getting on the other side, then I'm feeling like this relationship isn't as important to them as it is to me. And then, then at that point in time, I might set a boundary and unspoken walk away from that relationship. So I think each area is different, but I do agree that if someone's not giving you the same thing that you're giving back to them, so they're not giving grace, they're not giving patience, they're not showing, then that might be harmful. And so
let me
totally
just
fine.
say that I think flexibility works really well with mentally well people.
Yeah.
And flexibility does not work well with narcissists. Flexibility does not work well with toxic people.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to have to be a personal decision based on the relationship itself. In my situation, flexibility and grace has worked very well. But I can see for a lot of you who are in the comments and telling us about your family situations that flexibility and grace might not be the right ticket for you.
It has to go both ways.
Yeah.
If it's not going both ways, then there's one's taking advantage of the other.
Well,
right?
we even want to get into some episodes on our relationship reconstruction, and flexibility was a huge point for us. And there've been so many times during the process that I'm like, this would never work if there was a narcissist in the relationship. This kind of flexibility, because when you have an uneven power dynamic, it doesn't work to be flexible with those people. And so I feel so lucky that I have someone who is willing to self-reflect. Like, we're both looking at each other going, okay, what are my toxic traits? What are my red flags? Tell me what they are, so that we can like talk about it and deconstruct some of this stuff. But not everybody has that, sadly, so tell us what situation you're in if you feel comfortable sharing. I think it's really helpful for other people to be able to see what others are going through. And is there anything that you want to add to the close of this episode?
No, I think each person's journey is different, and each one of these bridge building items will be different based upon the situation you're in. What we just wanted to do is provide some tools for people to leverage if they want to bridge build.
Yeah.
And we totally understand if you don't want to bridge build.
Yeah.
That's a scenario, and that's a journey people can take. But if you do want to, and you do have family members that are Mormon and you're really struggling on developing those relationships, we thought we'd have this conversation because we talked about the harm the church does in the past, but we didn't really talk about like what's the tools that you can do to like reach over to the other community and kind of
heal and repair.
I do think there is core values that conflict.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, is recognizing that those are core values that are going to conflict and staying away from those. And so hopefully this provided tools for whoever that's in that type of relationship to help get through some of this.
And everybody has a different tolerance level.
Yeah.
For me, if you're an active member, you want to tell me about how you have a testimony of prayer, I am totally fine with that. But for someone else, that may be...
I can't deal with that.
Yeah.
And I even set that as a boundary with my mom and dad and said, hey, if you're having family prayer and you call on me, I'm not going to be part of that. So.
Yeah, I totally get that. I don't know what I would do if I got called to say a prayer. Probably say a prayer to the dear mother God.
That would be funny.
All right, you guys, I hope that this has brought some value to your faith journey experience. Please like, subscribe, share, give us a comment. Of course, we are on Instagram, and we take suggestions for future episodes. So we are starting to get ready to brainstorm some new episodes. We also have some really exciting interviews coming up for the podcast, and we're excited to share those with you. So go find us on Instagram at faith.unraveled and send us a DM, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bye, guys.